G'day and welcome to the Unsealed 4x4 medium-sized four-wheel drive wagon of the year awards. Now we've got 5 contenders here today. We've got the Holden Trailblazer, the Isuzu MU-X, the Mitsubishi Pajero Sport, the Toyota Fortuner and the Ford Everest. Now all these cars are worth about 55 grand, give or take a couple of $1,000. They're all diesel, they all seat 7, they're all autos and they're all four-wheel drive. Now we're out here at Mount Seaview Resort. We've got heaps of water crossings, steep climbs and rugged country. We're going to pit these things against each other and find out which one's a winner. I've got 5 industry experts with me today to help with the testing. I've got Jackson Bonner from Club 4x4 Insurance. I've got John Jamison from Diesel Care. I've got Adam Craze from Ironman 4x4 and Dave Carter from Toyo Tyres. Now we've got a series of tests to find out which of these cars is the best. On-road, off-road, family functionality, four-wheel drive touring, everything. Now with their combined expertise and industry experience, we're going to find out any weak points in these cars. Because this comparison sits at that 55 grand mark, the only Everest we can get into this obviously is the base model. And it is pretty base, to be honest with you, when you compare it to the other cars.
For a Ford, I thought it's probably very Americanised, I suppose, for our market.
The Ford Everest's got that big 3.2 litre diesel in it and seemed pretty functional off-road.
Off-road, I found the Everest to be quite good. It's got constant four-wheel drive, you lock that into 4x4 off-road, and you've got a rear locker as well.
The engine has got heaps of power, it's got heaps of torque. It's let down a little bit by the gearbox, changing at the wrong time.
It had a good suspension setup in it. It had full-time four-wheel drive.
Any time that I used it off-road, I found myself moving over to shift select because I didn't want it making decisions for me.
It's the only vehicle in this group that has a DPF as well as AdBlue. That's a real negative for me for a Go Bush vehicle.
But you could really feel the additional weight of that vehicle. It would have been the first one to spin wheels when going over some obstacles, and the biggest drawback for that car for me is the gearbox. They just completely missed the idea of tuning that gearbox to the motor. The 3.2 is making all of its torque down low and running out of puff around 2800, 3000 RPM.
It does have some better features on the higher spec model, and I think it's probably a better vehicle in that higher price range, but it became the one that I was let down by probably the most.
When this updated Trailblazer came out, I was really surprised about the changes Holden made. They changed the suspension a lot, and also the gearbox tuning, I think. It's a 6-speed, it's got the most torque here, and you can feel it. It feels really zippy through the driveline. Probably one of the better performing ones here, I reckon.
With the Trailblazer, I found that it had lots of information available to you that was right on the dash, so you could look at the transmission fluid temperature, lots of other really cool things.
The interior of the Trailblazer is a little bit of a mixed bag. You've got a lot of hard plastics in there. It hasn't got the finishings that the Pajero Sport or the MU-X has for the same money.
From a driving perspective, I was really impressed with the Trailblazer. It had a lot of power and felt the most powerful out of the lot. The engine and gearbox combination was pretty nice.
I was coming into it thinking not much of it, and for it to rate as well as it did and go as well as it did really surprised me.
The downhill descent on it, I'd have to say, was a bit of a negative for me. It was very jerky, it would hold, let go type thing, and quite noisy, so not as nicely refined there, but overall, for a family package, it's not bad value for money.
As an engine and gearbox package, the MU-X is pretty good. This one's got a 6-speed gearbox and the engine has been given a bit more torque just lately, so it's a pretty solid performer. Definitely not the best, but I also think definitely not the worst in this field. It feels quite good.
So the interior in the MU-X I thought was quite nice. You know, it even had the TV screen for the kids in the back, leather seats, and I felt like the controls were really ergonomic, easy to use.
Overall on-road, slightly towards the bottom, but off-road it performed quite well.
Driving the MU-X off-road, it went okay. It had a open rear diff, so you have to drive it to be able to get it to places. It's not going to crawl up a hill like some of the others. It's very truck-like when you get down into the nuts and bolts of it.
That 3-litre turbo diesel is an absolute grunter, and I feel like the gearbox in that was one of the few that actually let the diesel motor work like a diesel. And when you want to get up it and give it a good rev, they will rev out cleanly. It seems to have torque across the entire rev range.
The Pajero Sport was one of the better looking cars on paper here around that 55 grand mark because it does carry a heap of value for money.
The Mitsubishi Pajero actually blew me away how well that motor and gearbox worked together. The gear changes were right on target.
The 8-speed, it was the only one out of the 5 to have the 8-speed gearbox, and I just found that both on and off-road I always found the right gear.
The 8-speed box was really good, you know, it did well off-road.
Where the Pajero Sport did lack a little bit was off-road ground clearance.
I found that quite a few times over the week that was either scraping or got us stuck a couple of times.
The Pajero Sport did incur a bit of damage. We went through a bit of a rut there and we banged in the front bash plate pretty hard.
The payload section in the back I don't consider to be the best. The rear seat's also not so good. As an overall family package that's just going to do some soft off-roading of a weekend, it's still a fine car.
It's pretty surprising because you look at the sales records for these cars and the Fortuner is actually the least selling car out of all these 5. And so if you look at that, you think maybe it's not that good, maybe it's not that good value for money, maybe it doesn't perform that well.
The driving position for me, I'm probably an average sized person, was excellent.
The Fortuner was just ready to go anywhere we wanted to take it straight out of the box. It had really strong underbody protection. You'd put it through a couple of ruts, it'd flex up really nicely and keep a wheel down there on the road.
The Fortuner just worked. No matter what you put it through, on-road, off-road, it was stable, it was safe. You never felt like you had to drive the arse out of this thing to get it working.
I found the Fortuner to handle quite well, not too soft, not too stiff.
So the Fortuner just works for off-road. Steps, bars, racks, everything's really easy to build, fits on easily.
But it did lack some of the tech. For instance, if you're going to have your family in the back, but there's no airbags for that back seat, that's a negative.
The only other negative for me with the Fortuner was where the alternator was mounted. Fairly low on the engine there, a little bit more susceptible to mud and water and things like that. Some of the others were definitely a lot better. So the results are in. Got all the votes from everyone, counted them up, did a tally. Toyota Fortuner, #1. And it came in by a pretty decent margin as well. While it isn't necessarily the outright winner in every single category, it was definitely the most competent across the board. On-road was pretty good, off-road was great. Engine and gearbox performance, while it doesn't look that good on paper, is actually in the real world quite good. And one of the best things about this is the modification and touring suitability. Put batteries in, you can put drawers in a bit better. Probably fit bigger tyres a little bit easier as well on this, which would make it a really good car off-road. And for those reasons, we award the Toyota Fortuner the Unsealed 4x4 Mid-Size 4-Wheel Drive Wagon of the Year award.